Washington is the heavy favorite for four-star running back Brian Bonner.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, not only is Friday's episode a mailbag episode, so drop any comments you have down in the description below. Make sure you subscribe, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new show. And if you're on the audio and side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it all helps us out a lot. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydays today. We're going to do a little bit of a recruiting roundup to end the show. We're going to talk about guys like TI Umu-Cais, Blaise LaVista, a couple other fun names to get in there, because we want to make sure we talk about Rahsjon Duncan, who got a crystal ball to Washington on Monday night. And he's not the only guy who did get a crystal ball. As somebody who, it's been back and forth, we've been like, oh, maybe it's Washington, maybe it's UCLA. Kind of feels like, you know, whatever week there was a new leader between one of those two. But Washington has picked up a crystal ball from 247 Sports' Blair Angulo to land the nation's second highest ranked uncommitted running back in four-star Brian Bonner.
The one that always felt like the longer it goes, the better it is for Washington. And I know it always kind of sounds like, oh, well, how do you know that? And it's like, well, UCLA's in his backyard. You got a running back, Deshaun Foster, as your head coach. So, like, there's all the reasons to go to UCLA if you were going to do that by now. But it's the relationship with Scottie Graham, the way that Scottie just kind of builds and hangs. Now, I didn't want to say hangs around, because that's not really what it's been. I think it's
you're right.
But it's just been a case of like, hey, like, I'm not going to tell you when to commit. If you want to commit, commit. If you don't want to commit, hey, we're still good. Like, but I'm not, if I take another guy like we do with Dre Pollard, I'm not saying, hey, we're not taking you, because Dre and Brian Bonner, you know, like, respectfully, much different category. So I think, you know, you take both guys plus Ansu Sanoe, you're more than happy for Scottie Graham.
So I had a rant that I wanted to go on about Dre Pollard later, but because you set me up so perfectly, I want to do it now. And it's something where I remember covering it in the bonus show, where it's, this does not preclude taking Brian Bonner, where everything that we saw, like following the commitment with Ansu Sanoe, saying, hey, this is the 1-2 punch and everything like that, that's all well and good. Like, that's totally fine. But it's, as you said, it's exactly why you take somebody like Dre Pollard. It's, hey, this is just a really talented athlete who has the burst and all the speed that you're looking for from that high-end speedy running back. I hate that I use that word twice, but that's, you know, that really is the best way to describe what his skill set is right now. And it's also the number one thing that Brian Bonner brings to the table. I like what he's able to do in open space. He's got a couple of nice juke moves that he's just, you know, already, I don't want to say perfected, but has done a really good job of learning throughout the years and refining. But it's one of those things where he runs a 10.48. Like, that's his personal best in the 100-meter on the track. So that's elite speed. That's faster than Dre Pollard, who was at a 10.67, I believe, this last season when he won the 100-meter state championship in Nevada. So you still can find a way to get faster and utilize both of those guys' top-end speed on your roster. And it's something where, you know, like we've said, Dre Pollard has played a lot of receiver at Ed W. Clark. It was something when he first got the offer, you and I were talking about it as, is he going to play defensive back? Like, that's the conversation we were having about this, because that's just the kind of athlete that he is. And you find a way to use that. And like, I want to talk about it later with Blaise LaVista as well. It's, you can still find ways to make sure that you're taking other targets at wide receiver, at corner. Like, again, we'll get to later with Rahsjon Duncan as well, where it's, this is just a guy where with Donovan Robinson, we saw it with Rashawn Clark as well. You take him as an athlete, you get him on campus, and then it's, okay, yeah, this is where we want to put you. And with a guy like Brian Bonner, who you know is a high-end elite talented running back, assuming this crystal ball comes to fruition, that's all you're doing, is you're adding speed and skill to your offense.
And you're doing it in a way that doesn't preclude anything from already changing, like we've talked about, where you're looking at it and saying, you don't have to go into a portal back. You don't have to do other things, where Jedd wants to build through the high school ranks. What better way to get a big bruiser, an electric guy, and two electric running back, in Pollard and Bonner, where you're looking at it and saying, okay, no matter who ends up coming out of this group in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, whatever it ends up being, we're set. Like you're not worried about, oh, well, maybe now Ansu might leave, or maybe now Dre might reconsider things. No, they're all different types of guys. And in the Big Ten, you want to have different types of weapons to use. Like when you were running through that, I was running through the offense. I'm like, imagine you put, Audric Harris, Dre Pollard, Brian Bonner, and you just go put the track team out there basically. And it's imagine like Damon, like there's so many different. No, that's what that's where my mind was cooking. And I'm thinking like, and the reason why I was doing it that way is it's like explaining it to fans. That's why you just continue to stack the talent. You don't look at it and say, oh, this is a concern because now you might push one of your other guys away. No, look at the room. You might as well just add one more back because you can do so many different things with it.
So this is something I've thought about for a while in terms of since like this Big Ten conference realignment, all this sort of stuff happened, where adding a guy like Brian Bonner, who I legitimately believe is going to play as a freshman, especially with, Jonah Coleman out of the mix where he'll be graduated and the room is going to be somewhat split between Adam Muhammad and Jordan Washington. I believe that Brian Bonner can find his way in there. But when you talk about what just some of these just groups of speedy receivers and running backs can look like at the college level, that's something that Big Ten teams have not built around, where this is by no means saying, hey, you can't go out there and stack the trenches along the offensive line or defensive line. That's still extremely important. But it's something that Scottie Graham talked about with us in the spring, where it's, we're taking these two different kinds of running backs depending on the personnel the defense is going to show us or how a certain other team has built their roster, where, this is a team that, they're ready to just stack the box and defend you coming downhill. We're going to put one of our speed guys in and run around you. And if they're going to spread the field on defense because they've got a lot of defensive backs that can tackle in space or do whatever, we're going to put our big 225, 230 pound bruiser in there and run through you. And it's, I'm not trying to say that this is otherworldly or anything like that, but it's just an interesting pivot, I want to say, because I don't think that this is unique to Washington either. I think it's something that USC and Oregon have also shown. And I say that because it's just an adaptation of bringing the Pac-12 into the Big Ten. And I think there are ways that you can make that work and utilize all this speed in a way that Big Ten teams, the top end, the Penn States, the Michigans, the Ohio States are still going to be able to contend with. But a lot of these other Big Ten teams have built their roster. Iowa is a great example. They've built their roster in a particular way for so long that you can find ways to out-strategize them by adding so much speed and just saying, you want to play like this, we want to play like that. We're going to force you to adjust to us, while on the other side of the ball, we're going to make sure that we adjust to what you're doing as well.
And it gives Jedd so many different opportunities as a play caller. That's what because the school that came to mind was Penn State, like Nick Singleton and
Katron Allen.
Thank you. And then you talk about like building that out 2-3 years. You're not talking about, oh, hey, this is a portal big, 1 year kind of, let's see how this works. It's no, imagine doing that for 2-3 years in a row. And then that's why it's so important to stack this talent and do it in the high school ranks, because you can build that out and you don't have to then go back to the wishing well one more time. You can say, wait, imagine Brian Bonner as a sophomore. After he's played 13 games with Jordan Washington, kind of in a reserve role. It's like, wait till Jordan and Brian are on the same team or on the field at the same time, maybe, and then you throw in Dre Pollard in that mix. And like now you really are starting to get kicking. And it's like, that's where the play calling stuff from Jedd that we saw in year 1, by year 3, we won't even be talking about, because he has so many different weapons. That play calling struggle is not even going to be able to be a thing.
Lars, let's flip sides of the ball here, because Rahsjon Duncan would be a really intriguing add to this defensive backs class. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights just like me, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach, which is great news for anybody who wants to take some action on the Washington Huskies this season. That over-under for the win total right now for the year is set at 7.5, and I think that is a fantastic line right now to go and slam the over, because you look at all the young talent on this roster with guys like Damon Williams and all of these just veterans that are going to really help carry Washington in what might be their final year. Takario Davis, Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston. There's so much talent on this roster, and the way the schedule shapes up is so nice. I think 8 wins is an easy yes for me, and I would certainly go take that over. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Lars, this is a really interesting crystal ball for 3-star defensive back Rahsjon Duncan, who goes to McClymonds High School down in Oakland, California. He's somebody who got a late offer from this coaching staff in early June. And as soon as that offer went out, my phone blew up from a couple people who were very close to the coaching staff, just saying like, hey, we love this dude. And, it's one of those things where you look at Derek Johnson going to Oklahoma and how Washington just felt like they could very quickly move on to Rahsjon Duncan. And it's okay, maybe, this was always part of the plan because of his versatility. He can play outside corner. He can play safety if you want him to. And I look at what he brings to the table. And again, assuming this crystal ball comes to fruition, just like with Brian Bonner, this is a perfect addition to round out this defensive backs class.
It really is. And there was somebody they pulled from the same high school years ago that was defensive back. The name's escaping me. But because I was right when I saw that offer initially, I was like, oh, like that's almost a guarantee. Just when you have DBs from the Bay that come out, it's like for a fact what you're getting. 6'1", 170, 180. Like that's why you want that size and length. Like that's why we're so high on like Duncan, because what John Richardson can do with a tall, long cornerback, whether he plays, like you said, safety or cornerback. There's that athleticism and versatility, and it really would be, again, it's not the Devon Benjamins of the world, it's not a Brian Arrington, but I do think, John Richardson can turn guys into, 4 and 5 star guys that maybe aren't ranked like that, and I think you trust the evaluation, you trust the, talent on tape that you see, and then you trust your coaching staff, and I think that's kind of why, when we're talking about completing the class in terms of the DBs, that's why he'd be a perfect fit.
So I love everything you're saying there. The one thing for me, whenever I think about Rahsjon Duncan, is it goes back to something you and I have talked a lot about with the rest of this defensive backs class. And the Everydayers know, I feel like we've hammered this point home several times with this. He is like really versatile. Like I said, can play outside corner, can play safety. And in this defensive scheme, you can find a way for him to do both. And, I say that because when you go and you turn on the film, it's not just that he is a big, long corner on the outside who has a couple of nice clips actually locking up 2025 UW signee Deji Ajose, which is fun to see. But there are a couple plays on his film where I feel like I made this comp before, where he just kind of reminds me of Gavin Day with the way he's just willing to lay out and go after opposing wide receivers, which is really fun to see, because this is something that I've gotten a couple of questions about this from our insiders, and it's something I'm sure you and I have both seen a fair amount on social media as well, is like, it's always confusing to see, but is Washington taking too many defensive backs? And I always say no, because it's not only are you losing 5 guys to graduation after the season, but this is a room that I think is desperately in need of a young talent infusion. And I don't mean that to disparage anybody that's in the room. I think there are some really nice high-end prospects in the room, but obviously getting more and getting guys like Rahsjon Duncan into the room who are so willing and able to go out and contribute in run defense is so important, especially in the Big Ten.
Yeah, what's that cliche? The best availability, or what's that, like the best ability?
The best ability is availability?
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what it sounds like, where you have everybody at your disposal. You have, and again, whether all 6 end up playing 4 years here, probably not. But again, that's why you get them, sign them, and then sort it out 18 to 24 months down the line, because you don't know what position you're going to be in. And, guys transfer, maybe Leroy pops. Dylan Robinson's a 3-year guy, so you need to have that talent stacked in the room so you don't have any type of fall off. So much like the receiver position last year, you load up at the premium positions where we look at the NFL draft every year. How many usually going in called the top 15 or defensive back in general? Like that's a position where it's not left tackle, edge, and quarterback. but it's right next to it. Where look at Takario, look at what Umu-Cais can turn into. Those premium positions are guys that you just want to load up at, and then whatever happens down the line happens.
So I like where you're going with that. But I thought about this in a different light. And it goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago about this Ryan Walters scheme, where we've seen it have success. And, I mentioned it, and we're certainly going to continue to discuss it later on. But you need some impact defensive linemen, especially on the interior. But having defensive backs that can tackle, that can fill gaps and run support, and to not let guys get outside because they're good tacklers, because they're so strong in that department, is something that is so critical. And it worked decently well at Purdue, but it worked so well when his defense was number 1 in the nation at Illinois in 2022. Like, that's just the kind of scheme that this can be when defensive backs are functioning at a high level. And, you talk about premium positions. Having a top 5 pick in a guy like Devon Witherspoon is really helpful, but having other guys like Sidney Brown, who went in the second round, are also really impactful with that. And just having, again, guys who can tackle, because that was something where at different points last year, like, Thaddeus Dixon could certainly tackle, but it was something where it's why Rashawn Clark, we just have felt for a long time that he was going to come into the year and start at nickel, because he's such a willing and able tackler. It's why you go out and you get CJ Christian from the transfer portal. Mikel Esteen showed what he can do as a tackler against Indiana last year. Alex McLaughlin, another really good, productive tackler. Having those kinds of guys in this defense, especially when you and I have talked about what it's going to look like up front, and having so many defensive linemen on the field, and, a 5 down front rushing the passer as often as possible in terms of blitzing. I think that having some of these defensive backs that can fill these holes is just going to be so critical, and reloading the position, it just makes it that much more important.
And it's something that, it's not necessarily a need, right? Like, do you need one more? No, but that's when you're talking about an NFL system. You want to have a healthy depth at every single position. And this isn't a case where you're looking at things, is it worth this call? Or, do you risk the number? It's like, no, because the numbers, as you play it out, like we talked about, you're losing a bunch of guys. You're losing, both probably your starters after the season. And then you're looking at the depth long-term and thinking, we like the youth, but we can still use more. And I think that's the other side of this equation. When you look at all those guys leaving, in call it 18 months or less, I think that's why you look and think, let's take one more, round it out, whether he plays safety or cornerback. You're getting another secured piece in the room and saying, wherever he ends up playing on the field, we at least have the body in the room on the roster, so we don't have to question it moving forward.
So I like where you're going with that. I think I don't know if it's necessarily the final piece, though. This is one quick thing I want to say where I feel like this does eliminate Washington from the Devon Benjamin race, where it feels like the Cards have been trending that way for the last couple of days. But outside of that, the one other guy who I think could still find his way into Washington's 2026 class after he pushed back his commitment date. I'm not saying that Washington is the leaders. I'm not saying anything remotely close to that right now. But if this coaching staff wanted to make a push for Celeste Moa, I think that's the one thing that could also give Rahsjon Duncan a more defined position if that's what this coaching staff wants. If you're able to find a way to secure his pledge, I still think Utah is the heavy favorite, but if you're able to do that, obviously he's going to end up playing both ways, but he's mainly going to play safety on the defensive side. And it's something with Duncan where with that size and frame, if you want to stick that at outside corner full time, I think that's a fantastic idea because of just the way he plays, just the edge he plays with. He very much looks like, in a much smaller frame, what Takario Davis did in high school, where it's just the long arms, the suffocating coverage, the way he plays, it just reminds me a lot of that. And just as I continue to look at how Washington can find ways to, I don't want to say revamp the secondary, but it's just overhaul it because you're losing so many seniors after the season. I think that that's one of the ways you could do it if you're able to pull that off. But I say all that just so I can just come back and say, I don't think that's what's going to end up happening. I do believe that this is going to end up being the final piece that Washington adds. And then it's something where, you and I have talked about the defensive line and what that's probably going to have to look like through the transfer portal with the way just recruiting has gone at that position in the cycle. You don't have to say that at the secondary anymore because you went out and you got those two safeties last year that you do like, one of them with 1 year of eligibility remaining, the other with 2. And now you don't have to do that for several years when you look down the line and you see all these young safeties who by the end of next season are going to end up contributing. And it's why Tacario Davis was such a critical add on top of being one of the best players in the transfer portal. He gives you a little bit more time to let Dylan Robinson develop, to make sure Leroy Bryant is ready to start. And all of these guys behind him, whether it be the players in this class or, Ramon Adams, Darian Clemens, Elias Johnson, some of these other younger players in the room who need a little bit more time to develop. Now, all of a sudden, you feel a lot more confident in where the young players in that room stand going into next season. And in spring ball, you're way more ready and able to see who's going to be able to step up into a bigger role. But Lars, there are a lot of other guys we wanted to add a couple of notes on, and we got to start with TI Umu-Cais. One guy you and I wanted to have a conversation on is 4-star defensive tackle TI Umu-Cais. Our buddy Scott Eklund at Dogman put out a report, I believe it was yesterday, saying that Washington, it doesn't seem to be like things are trending in the right direction with them right now. I can't confirm that. I don't know if you can. I know you've gotten a chance to talk to him once or twice, but it's no secret that he is by far the most important player in this class right now for Washington in terms of uncommitted recruits.
Yeah, this is like you almost touched on it a little bit at the end of last segment where you said the way the D-line recruiting is going. And I think that's just kind of what the trend is seeming, where a guy who absolutely should, but possibly now won't be.
Hold on, you're going to want to start that.
But like you mentioned, you kind of hinted at that a little bit towards the end of last segment, where the way the D-line recruiting has been going, it's a guy that's possibly trending away from Washington that already should be almost in the boat for Washington. And I think that should be kind of a call to arms to Jedd and saying, hey, a guy on the West Coast that you absolutely needed, that you needed, it's in the trenches, but you might not end up with him. That's a problem. That is a straight up problem. And it's, by the way, not a new problem. Out of left field problem. This is kind of a, hey, like you kind of probably should have been seeing this one coming. But a guy, until signing day, I will never close the door on that one completely, just because I know TI is very high on Washington, or has been very high on Washington. But, there's so many factors in recruiting. And I think, if things change, in certain positions and you look in December and say, hey, would you want to run it back or reconsider things? Maybe you consider it at that point. But yeah, like it's a guy where he should already be in the boat, and the fact that he's not, like, that's kind of a problem.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of the Brian Bonner one, right? Where you mentioned that earlier, where it's, the longer this one plays out, the better it is for Washington. I don't feel that case this way, because all of the smoke that I know I had heard coming out of his official visit was he was really impressed with everything UW had to offer, and then it just kept going and kept going and kept going. And I truly don't know who the favorite might be right now in terms of his recruitment. I still feel like things certainly could fall Washington's way, especially with the way the rest of the defensive line class is shaped up. And this coaching staff understands what kind of impact he would bring to this class. But it's something where I feel like fans have a right to be a little bit concerned until you see otherwise at this point in time. After, David Schwartzel, Faciale, Tristan Givens, Landon Barnes, obviously all very different circumstances in terms of how their recruitment played out. I feel like this one is, I look at all 5 of those guys, and I feel like there was something different about this one, where Washington identified him not early, because he already had 20-something offers by the time Ryan Walters did extend an offer to him, but just in terms of the way this one always felt with Washington, something you've mentioned, where his favorite player is Vita Vea. Like, there were so many things that were just so clearly in UW's favor for a while that it was, okay, yeah, you can see why this one might fall UW's way. And then the fact that it hasn't has certainly been concerning, to say the least, especially when you look at the way this defensive line is going to turn over the next year or 2 years. There is so much playing time readily available for a guy like that.
It is, and that's why it's so disappointing if UW doesn't end up getting him, because everything is there for TI Umu-Cais to commit to Washington. Like, all the resources are there, all the reasons are there. On the West Coast, like, you're just running through it, and it's like, man, how are you now? When you look at some of those schools, and I was looking at UNC, a handful of others, and it's, man, if you lose it, let's run that theory by. If you lose him to UNC, that's the kind of optic for you. Add to just atrociously worse.
Oh, absolutely. That's something that we're going to keep an eye on, but we wanted to talk about somebody else before we get out of here today. And one of just the one guy who I talked about him a lot last week is Blaise LaVista, where Washington fans have kind of looked at this offer and said, oh, why don't you just go get Daniel Odom? Why aren't you closing on Celeste Moa? I think Daniel Odom is a unique case. We've already got a couple questions about that for our Friday mailbag. So we'll talk a little bit more about him then. But, flipping a guy it's like we talked about with Kari Wilder a few weeks ago. This is why you never want to count on flipping somebody compared to just going after an uncommitted guy. But I look at Blaise and I watched that film. I went back and watched it again for something I wrote over on Huskies Wire, and he just pops, man. Where you think about just a big physical outside guy who has really nice footwork, who can run by players. He led all of Illinois last year in receiving yards. Like he's that level of talented, despite what the ranking might say. And I think this could end up being a really nice case for Washington, just in terms of what their talent evaluation looks like, where very similar to Rahsjon Duncan, it's don't look at the rating, just actually go and watch the player and then just say, and then make up your mind, where don't go into that. Like, that's one of the things that I always tell people who do want to try to get more into recruiting and learn a little bit more about the process. Go into the film without looking at it, any sort of ranking, watch the player, and then make your decision on how you feel about him. And this is like, in terms of people who, you want to go watch like an underrated 3-star, Rahsjon Duncan, somebody from the 2024 class who ended up at USC after the coaching change, is another prime example I like to give with that. It's watch the kid, don't watch the competition, and then think about how he might fit into the offense in this case. And he is somebody who, I expect to take a major jump in the next couple of months in recruiting rankings because he's got the film to back it up, B.
Yeah, do you remember the name that I told you that came to mind when I said go watch Blaise, and it kind of reminds me of this guy? And I know it's again.
Oh, you said Roman Tomashoff, yeah.
Now the reason mostly why
I did understand what you meant after I watched.
And mostly also because he does wear number 1, and he just the way you look at it when he goes in motion, and just the confidence that the reason why I said Rome, before I'm watching a pre-snap, the confidence that Blaise has pre-snap of where he's gonna be, I think that's the thing for me, where he's got the speed.
So I disagree. I hear what you were saying, but I actually saw it in a different way, where the thing that really popped about Roma Dunze's film, and again, we just to be very clear for all the everydays out there, we are not comparing these two players.
Yeah.
We're just saying this is a similarity in their game. For me, it was how easy it is for him to get to top speed and how he just kind of glides by defenders. Where that was something where one of the things with Rome, you and I have talked a lot about track times already in this episode. With Rome I believe he was the state champion of the 200-meter dash in Nevada. And he just accelerates so quickly and easily. And it took him 1 or 2 of his very long strides to get to top speed. And that was something that I thought was very similar with Blaise. So I don't think anything you're saying is wrong. I just saw it a little bit differently.
Yeah, and again, I'm glad you clarified that, because and this is no disrespect to Blaise, but he's not Rome. Because again, Rome is really one-on-one, like that when you talk about pure athleticism and stuff like that, but just a similar makeup, you can kind of see maybe Kevin Cummins can get a little more, tap in a little more into that. But I think that was an offer where, again, this is a pure, when we talk about this staff to evaluate talent, no matter where it is in the country, this is a prime example of that. A guy that can produce, a guy that's got, 18 plus touchdowns, 1,200 yards plus, that's good numbers. And imagine, 24. Yeah. Again, I'm just, lowballing him in the sense of like, I don't want to be too far off on the high end.
No, that's
but again, a guy that has the production, and the guys that you could easily see in this offense. Like, just imagine like him as an outside guy opposite of, whoever you throw out there. That's a guy where you can line him up at any part of the field. He'll find a way to get open, and he's got the speed. Like, I think 3 traits that Jedd would just, have a fun time working with. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something where you can see why they like him at the outside at that X receiver position, because he can make plays after the catch. He can win at all 3 levels of the field. It's something where I think I pointed this out the other day, as some of the everydayers would know, where it was 60. He had 60 catches last season. 24 of them went for touchdowns. It's a 40% touchdown rate in terms of receptions, which is just absolutely otherworldly, which is just a lot of fun to see. And it's one of those things where, it's not that you don't want to go get the higher rated guys in Daniel Odom, in Madden Williams. But if these guys want to stay committed, like Madden Williams does, Texas A&M, and they shut down their recruitment, and there's nothing you can do about that because he committed in January and you took the swing and you missed. Taking a guy like this is not a bad thing. There is so much promise here where maybe it takes a year or two to develop, but you really like the upside and everything that he brings to the table. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank to all my viewers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason, including that mailbag episode on Friday. So make sure you drop those questions down in the description below and make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.